planet Earth has changed enormously since the times of Nyasasaurus in the Middle Triassic, some 250 million years ago. But some things have stayed the same until present times. Plants can't move around. When it comes to pollination, which is the plant's way of having sex, they need help. Pollination is the transfer of pollen from an anther of a flower of one plant to the stigma of the flower of another plant. Some plants use wind or even water to spread their pollen. But this is a very random and wasteful method to find a partner. A much more goal-oriented and economical way is to have animals as fertilization helpers. The first pollinators of flowering plants were probably beetles. Bees joined them about 130 million years ago. After the pollen grain has landed on the stigma, it germinates and develops a pollen tube which grows down the style until it reaches an ovary. In the ovary, a male nucleus fuses with an egg cell, and an embryo is produced. Flowering plants and their pollinators have a mutualistic relationship of the resource-service type. The flowers of the plant provide nutrients in the form of nectar to the pollinators. The animals, in turn, provide a service of transferring pollen grains from one flower to another to aid the process of fertilization. Both sides benefit in the process. About 80% of flowering plants rely on biotic pollination. There are over 150,000 insect species acting as pollinators. Additionally, about 1,500 species of vertebrates are known to pollinate. Birds such as hummingbirds, sunbirds or honeyeaters, mammals such as bats, rodents or duendes, and even some reptiles and the occasional frog. In many cases, there has been a long process of coevolution between flowering plant and pollinator. For the plants, the most efficient way of fertilization is to attract pollinators that visit only their type of flowers. Such flower constancy prevents the loss of pollen during interspecific flights and blocks pollinators from clogging stigmas with pollen of other flower species. It also improves the probability that the pollinator will find productive flowers easily accessible and recognizable by familiar clues. To achieve flower constancy, several strategies have evolved. Most plants use colours and scent to find pollinators. The pollinators' rewards are nutritious nectar and pollen. Plants that flower in daylight produce copious nectar and have colourful tepals. They attract bees or butterflies, birds or beetles. After dark, moths, bats, and nocturnal duendes take over the night shift for pollination. Nocturnal flowers with pale or white flowers heavy with fragrance and copious dilute nectar attract these pollinators. But plants also trick pollinators by pretending to be something else. Certain flies are deceived into pollinating flowers that produce odours of decay and mimic the decaying flesh in which these flies normally lay their eggs. Some orchids are sneaky mimics too. The flower's velvety lips looks like a female bee or wasp. Males fly in to try to mate with it and end up pollinating the flower, and all that effort without getting a drink of nectar. Another common strategy of plants to achieve flower constancy is to restrict access to food resources to only a few specialized pollinators. In floral sonication, also called buzz pollination, the pollen is only released from the anther if a pollinator vibrates close to it at a certain frequency. When a bumblebee is visiting a tomato flower, it clings to the pollen packages and buzzes energetically at a specific frequency that is not used by other pollinators. The pollen is freed from the anthers, and the bumblebees are able to collect the pollen grains on their fur. A classic process of coevolution first found by Darwin is how food-rewarding flowers and pollinators develop deep floral tubes and matching long tongues. The longer the tube that gives access to the flower's nectar, the longer the tongue of the pollinator has to become. This has led to extreme adaptations such as the enormously long beak and tongue of the sword-billed hummingbird, or the proboscis of hawk moths that can reach several times their body length. A variation of this coevolution is to have a specific form of floral tube and a fitting bird beak, as in the case of sicklebill hummingbirds and the flowers of Centropogon. These very specialized mutualistic relationships give the plant the benefit of high flower constancy, and the pollinator the benefit of almost exclusive access to a high-energy food source. Pollinators are immensely important, not only for natural food webs, but also for horticulture and agriculture. Fertilization is dependent on pollination, and without fertilization there is no fruiting. Many pollinator populations have experienced dramatic declines due to human interventions, such as spraying of pesticides and large-scale destruction of natural habitats. Future land management must emphasize pollinator protection, or parts of the global food chains will suffer severe consequences. In our next episode, we will look at seed dispersal, another mutualistic interaction between animals and plants. Stay tuned and don't forget to hit the subscribe button.